Hi, this is Justin Coletti of SonicScoop, and thanks for joining us for some more MixCon. And in this week's MixCon Masterclass, we've got none other than Koen Heldens. In case you don't know Koen Heldens, he is a tremendous mixing engineer who's worked on platinum selling and diamond selling releases. He's worked a lot in the world of hip-hop and R&B. He started early in his career working with the likes of Dr. Dre, Timbaland, Scott Storch, total legends in the hip-hop world. He's worked with Lil Wayne, Kanye West, really well known for his work with XXXTentacion. And this time, he's cracking open an R&B mix for us from an artist named Mario to show us exactly how he goes through his mix in tremendous detail. I think you're going to like this one a lot. Before we get into it, one thing I've got to let you know in advance is that this presentation, like all of the MixCon masterclasses, are 100% free to the public thanks to our sponsors. And the sponsor on this one is a perfect fit for Koen because he uses this stuff on every single mix he does. It is soundidreference from sonarworks. In case you're not familiar, soundidreference is a solution for tuning your headphones, your speakers, your monitors, and your room so you can make better mixes, make better decisions, and simply trust your ears when you're mixing. He uses them on his headphones all the time. This was a super important part of his approach when he was a little bit of a nomad between studios, and he still uses their stuff even when he's in super high-end studios, and he especially uses them on his headphones to turn them into a monitoring solution he can trust, which he uses on every single one of his mixes. So big thanks to soundidreference and sonarworks for sponsoring this one. Before we get into it, last quick note for you. We're going to be doing a live Q&A as soon as this presentation ends, where you'll be able to ask your questions of Koen. You can actually enter them into the chat right here if you're here for the premiere. There's a chat box on your screen, and we'll be collecting the best questions from this live premiere to ask Koen as soon as this presentation ends. I'll link to where you can check out that live Q&A. Of course, this presentation and that live Q&A will be available on replay after this main presentation is over. And one last quick note for you. If you want to win a whole bunch of stuff for free, potentially thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of free gear, go over to the MixCon Mega Giveaway at sonicscoop.com/MixCon giveaway. That's sonicscoop.com/MixCon giveaway, where you can sign up for 3 chances to win a whole bunch of great free gear from MixCon sponsors. Hope to see you at that live Q&A afterwards. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Mr. Koen Heldens, take it away.
What's up guys, my name is Koen Heldens and I'm super excited today that you guys could join me for my MixCon 2021 presentation. Now before we jump into my mix walkthrough, I wanted to show you guys how I've been working predominantly during this pandemic. In my living room, pretty much like everybody else, work from home. So what am I using? Just my laptop, my interface and my headphones. Now one might wonder, how can you mix on headphones and make sure that your mixes translate onto other systems? Well, I'm using the soundid plugin from sonarworks for this. Basically what it does, it flattens the frequency response of my headphones, and I know exactly that what I'm hearing on my headphones is truly the sound that I need to be hearing. Meaning, it'll translate onto any other system. Thank you guys for watching, and let's jump into my mix walkthrough for the MixCon 2021. Let's go. Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Koen Heldens. I'm an international multi-platinum and multi-diamond mixing engineer. You've probably heard some of my work with XXXTentacion, Trippie Redd, Kanye West, Lil Wayne, among many others. Today we're at Rolling Loud Studios in Miami, and I'm pleased to be one of the presenters at MixCon of this year's event, and we're gonna go over a mix from start to finish. The song is Luxury Love by Mario, one of my favorite singers. Let's jump in. So as I said, today's session is Mario, Luxury Love. Song came out in January. So usually what I do with mixes is I request mix stems versus Pro Tools sessions. The reason for that is that it's easier for me to load them in without any technical difficulties, because a lot of times you guys are using plugins that I might not have, or plugins that are older and are supported on my OS system, or vice versa, so that can cause some of the technical issues where the sounds will sound different from what you have in your rough mix. And your rough mix to me is the blueprint that we are building from. So even with this record, I got the blueprint, the rough mix from Mario himself, loaded in all the stems, as you can see on the screen right here. And then what I do from the beginning is once the stems are loaded in, there are 3 plugins that I always use on vocals. And I'll show those to you guys. I use these offline. The first one is the iZotope RX declick. So I select all the vocals, and then I use the multi-band random click algorithm. It basically removes any of the click sounds that a vocal might have. Maybe something in the audio that, maybe it was a cable or a static or something that was there that caused some clips. It takes it out. After that, I always do the iZotope RX deplosive, basically to remove any plosive sounds, because it could be that a singer moved too close to the microphone, tapped the microphone stand, or just taps his feet on the floor. So we don't want to have any of that proximity effect happening within the vocal. So this one cleans it up real nice, so there's no extra use for me to go on each track and insert an EQ to roll off the low end that way. This will solve it, so it's the RX deplosive. And then lastly, what I do is the iZotope RX mouth declick. The name already says it, it's the clicking sound that a mouth might make when they're singing. It's not very pleasant. This cleans it up very nicely. I don't know what the magic is behind it, but it works perfectly. So those are the 3 plugins I use from the get-go, just to get the vocals cleaned up for me and ready to jump in to them. So once everything is loaded in, what I do is I color code the tracks. So for me, vocals are always blue, because then with one quick view on the screen, I can see what I'm looking at. Am I looking at vocals? Am I looking at drums? That way I can quickly address elements in the mix that I feel like need addressing, or attention for that matter. Basses are for me always brown. So as you can see, there's an 808 in here, there's a sub in here, there's some white bass, more like a synth bass in there. And then my drum tracks are always red. So not a lot of drums going on here. So we have a kick, we have a snare, we have a fill, some toms, some percussion, and then my keyboards are always purple. Now, if there were any guitars in here, I use more of like a golden brown color type for keyboards. Special effects, those are not the reverbs or delays that might have been printed separate from the vocals. SFX is just basically whooshes, ramp-ups, any type of special effects that might be used in a song. I always color those green. Then using my template, I always have a few reverbs and delays standard in each session. Just by ease of use, I can send elements to them or vocals to them and quickly get a good sound for them. In this case, I'm using a vocal hall, which this is one of my favorite plugins. It's owned by iZotope nowadays, but it's the Exponential Audio R2. It's a real clean reverb, not as vintage or grainy as others are. So it's a very nice, clean reverb. Then I'm using a EMT plate emulation type thing. It's the TSR1 from SoftTube. It's a very, very nice reverb. I think this might actually be my favorite reverb. Every once in a while I use the Valhalla, because there are sessions that people have the Valhalla reverb on there, so I use those. In this case, I use the TSR1, and I'm using their EMT plate preset. I altered it a slight bit, but it's pretty much at its default setting. Then I have a percussion reverb, which again is the TSR1 from SoftTube. It's basically when you have any percussive sound that are too spiky or too much in your face, this can blend it right back a little bit to the background. So see reverb as your front to back panner, as is your panning from left, center, right. Then what I'm using on the session is just a simple quarter note delay. Sound always sounds great. Nothing specific on here, just change a little bit of the groove and the feel. Again, I start out with one of their presets, which is the clean ping pong. Altered it a slight bit just to get the feel better, to make it more of a background thing than something leading, because that's not what we want to have. And there's a half note delay. Same exact story, same plugin, Echo Boy by Soundtoys. So that's basically how I start off the session, color code it, some of my template settings that are in there. And then once I'm ready to start the mix, what I do is I send everything into my submaster or mix bus, as you might say, just to get an overall feel of what it's going to sound like as a finished record. Especially if it does go to a mastering engineer, I want to give the client an loudest possible version that is close to what it would sound like when the mastering engineer is finished with it. In this case, we kept my master, So it's all a one-stop shop basically. So I gain stage everything into my mix bus, and then that way I'm easily comparable with the rough. So I can A/B it with the rough without having to change that much of volumes. It's pretty much equal to what the rough is. So there's no competing there. We already know what it is sounding like. And this is very important because if I press play on the stems that I have and I A/B it with the rough, if there's anything that sounds different or is missing, I can hear it instantly and call up the producer to provide me with the additional stems that are missing or reprint stems that didn't come out very well. Then once that's done, what I usually always do first, unless there's something in the song itself that catches my attention, is start off with the vocals. So I want to clean up the vocals as much as possible without losing any of the vibe. Now the great thing is Mario is a great singer, so not a lot has been done to the vocals. I'm using Wave Studio Rack. The reason for that is that it's easy for me to put all the plugins in there and in cases try out or test out if there's a parallel chain that I need to do. In this case that was not the case, but what I will do is I will showcase you the vocal with any of the processing on there and then the vocals with the processing, and then I'll show you guys how I was trying to figure out if a parallel chain would benefit the vocals or not. In this case it's not, but at least you can see and hear the difference of a parallel chain on the vocals and not. So let me just solo part of the vocals. I think part of the hook will be great. So let's play that back with the processing on, and then I'll play it back without any of the processing on there so you can hear the difference. And then we'll jump in more detail of what I did.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah.
So that's a vocal with all the processing on there as well as the effects. So let me bypass all the effects and let me bypass all the processing that's done on the vocal and play you back now what the raw vocal sounded like.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah.
So what did I do on the vocals? First off, I'm using the CLA 76. So let me bypass all the other ones. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just knocking off a few dBs just to control the vocal a bit more, to get it more steady, stable, and in your face.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury.
You can hear it's more controlled, it's more compacted, it's better situated for the mix. So after compression, I always do EQ. EQ depends on how the vocal is recorded, how it's sounding. Sometimes I'm using static EQ. In this case, I'm using the Waves F6, which is also capable of doing dynamic equalization. Basically, what dynamic means is that it compresses a specific frequency or frequency region that you assign. So instead of it having it happen all the time, it will only cut or boost when the frequency is happening above the certain threshold. So let me play this back and you can see on the screen what's happening EQ-wise, and then I'll explain a little bit more.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby.
As you could see, there's a lot of mid-highs that are getting controlled with the dynamic EQ. So what happened here is it controlled the harshness of the vocals as well as the nasally tone of the vocals. So that the vocals are much more controlled, they're not piercing in your ear, and there's no annoying, almost whiny, nasally tone that's happening. So let me play this back again with the processing of the EQ on there, without it, and then I'll put the EQ back on again so you can hear the differences. So this is with again.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much.
So you can hear the vocal is much more controlled and sounding much nicer and more expensive, so to speak. Now, one thing that kept audible was the sibilance of the vocal. So I control it with the Waves de-esser. The reason why I like this plugin is because it's easy, it's simple, set and forget. So I've had it pretty much at the default setting of 5500 Hertz and up as a shelf, and it just controls it to the point where the S gets removed enough without it sounding like the singer has a lisp. So there's some nice control happening. So let me play this back and show it with the de-esser on, then I'll bypass the de-esser, and then I'll enable the de-esser again so you can hear the differences.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah.
Especially the T's in the words go controlled much nicer without it being that harsh. So next up, I'm using the SSL channel strip. And what I'm doing here is giving color to the vocals. Now, I could use a stock plugin or anything transparent, but I'm really looking for coloration, so more of the non-linearities that analog gear gives, the distortion, to fill the spectrum out more and make the vocal sound richer. So let me play this back with the EQ on, and then I'll take it back with the SSL plugin off, and then on again. So here we go with the SSL plugin on.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah.
So outside of the vocal becoming a bit more loud, volume-wise, it also became more in your face. And not a lot I did on the EQ itself. It's literally just the low mids, or the mids highs as you want to call it. It's around 1.2 kilohertz just to push it a little bit more, so it's more in your face, more present, and less competing with everything else that's going to be happening in the mix. So now we've addressed that. I tried to figure out if a parallel chain would benefit the vocal. So the reason why you sometimes want to use a parallel chain is to either give it more body or bring out certain elements that you don't want to necessarily bring out that much in the original chain, because the original vocal chain might be too much when you add those frequencies. So parallel is a nice way to lift the vocal, bring out certain frequencies without changing the tonality or the sound of the original vocal. So in this case, I didn't like it, but usually what I do is I parallel it with a 76 blue phase. The reason for a blue phase is that a blue phase distorts very quickly, but it's a nice distortion and it's a sheen that really can benefit a vocal. And then what I do afterwards is I'll add a little bit of pull tech. So I'll add some lows to bring out and lift the vocal out of the mix and remove a little bit of the high end so that the sibilance doesn't get too apparent. So let me play the vocal back without the parallel chain in, and then I'll add the parallel chain in again so you can hear what the differences are with and without the parallel chain. So this is with the parallel chain.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah.
So as you could hear, with the parallel chain in, it became much more apparent, the vocals. And for reasons with the instrumentation, I did not like that. I felt that the vocal became a little bit too big, so to speak, for the record itself. So I didn't need the parallel chain. So now you guys have seen how I treat vocals, and in particularly how I treated Mario's vocal for this song. Let's move on to the following elements in the mix. So outside of vocals, the other thing that's very important for a song, especially an R&B song, is the groove. And the groove gets established, in this case, by the drums and the basses that are happening. So let me solo those and play you back what the rhythm section with the bass are doing in the verse as well as the hook. As you can hear, there's not much going on. The verses are pretty much dominated by a percussive hi-hat type sound with a sub and a wide synth bass, and the chorus are driven by a simple kick, snare, percussion groove there. So what did I really do on those elements? So since we have an 808 in the chorus, let's start there. One thing I always do on 808s, especially when there's a kick playing, you have to decide which one goes where. So do I want to have the kick lower than the 808, or do I want to have the 808 lower than the kick? Usually, in most cases, you want to always have the 808 be the lowest part of the frequency spectrum and the kick sitting right on top. Now, when both play at the same time, what can happen is that you get too much low end happening when the kick hits at the same time as the 808 does. A quick, simple trick for that is to sidechain the kick to the 808, and then whenever the kick kicks in, that the 808 gets compressed, ducked, as we call it, with a few dBs. Now, doing that over the full spectrum of the bass, in this case the 808, will give us a pumping effect that we don't want to have, because it's not an EDM song, it's an R&B song. So we want to do this as subtle as possible. And the best way to do it is using a multi-band compressor and only using the lowest band. I've set it in this case to 90 Hertz. And then what happens is, every single time the kick hits, the bass get compressed, ducked below 90 Hertz, which in this case we are dealing with masking. So the way the human hearing works and the way we perceive sound. So whatever sound is louder always gets perceived over the sound that is less loud. So in this case, when the 808 below that frequency gets compressed, it's less loud, meaning that the kick gets its permanent in our ear. So it's better that way without it being a bass buildup whenever it happens. So let me play this back and showcase you what happens when those two elements are playing together. As you can hear, as soon as I bypass the multi-band, it kind of becomes mushy, if I can call it that way, a little bit muddy. There's no clear definition between the kick and the bass. It just sounds like it's glued together, but not in a nice way. As soon as I enable the multi-band compressor, you could hear the definition between whenever the 808 is playing and whenever the kick comes in. Very clear, distinct, and defined. That's the way that we want to have it. And it's subtle enough that you don't hear any pumping effect. So you got to make sure that at the end of the day, your compressor is set with a fairly fast release time. In this case, I'm using about 100 milliseconds. So it's fast enough for it to recover before the new hit hits, but at the same time fast enough so that our ear doesn't hear the difference between the kick hitting and the bass slightly ramping back up to its 0 dB point. So this is a very nice trick to keep your kicks and 808s clear and out of the way of each other. Now, another thing I did on the 808 is I used a parallel chain again. And in this case, what I did is I split the multiband up. And what I'm doing here is I'm putting a guitar stomp box on everything above 90 Hertz. The reason why I didn't want to put any distortion below 90 Hertz is because I don't like low end distortion, because it's really ugly, almost like you've blown up a speaker. It can work for different types of records, but not for a nice R&B record. So doing it above 90 Hertz just gives it enough overtones that the 808 becomes audible even on your smallest speakers. Because face it, we either listen on laptop speakers, earbuds, or other small speaker environments like iPhones or other telephones. So this is a great way to make sure that the 808 is also audible on the smallest speakers that we have, instead of not hearing it unless you go into a full range speaker system. So this is great. So let me play this back, the 808 and the kick. I'm going to play it back with the parallel in, then without the parallel in, and again with the parallel in, so you can hear the differences. As you can hear, as soon as the parallel chain comes back in, the 808 becomes much more apparent and cuts through more in the frequency range. So that's how I treat the 808. Now there's another sub happening in the verses, which pretty much got the same treatment. Since there's no kick playing, there's no need to do any side chaining, but there is a need for a parallel chain again with the multi-band split and the guitar stomp box on there. Just again to give it some overtone so it's more audible on the smaller speakers and more apparent and present within the mix itself, without feeling that there might be a hole between the low lows and the rest of the mix. So it fills the spectrum out very, very nice. Now moving on to the rest of the rhythmic session, let me solo the hook again and play back the drums again as a reminder of what that was sounding like. Pretty simple rhythmic loop. Let's start off with the kick drum. So the first thing I did on the kick drum pretty much is the parallel. I'm not doing anything on the original sound of the kick drum, as I didn't seem to find any problems with it, because that's usually what you're looking for what is there that might conflict with other sounds, what's there that needs cleaning up so it's much more apparent in the mix without being cluttered or anything, or an annoying frequency that we just don't want to have. In this case, I didn't feel that there was anything wrong with the kick drum per se. What I did want to do though was give it a parallel processing, which means I want to fill out the kick a bit more, make it a bit more bigger. So that's why we use parallel processing, because it doesn't change the overall sound of the original signal, it just gives it a nice lift in the way we want to have it, instead of changing the entire sound of the kick. So let me play the kick back in context with the rhythm section. With the parallel in, then I take the parallel out, and then I'll enable the parallel again and show you the settings. As you can hear, the kick became much more apparent, bigger, fuller. So what did I do? I used the simple DBX 160, and I'm compressing about 10 dB. So I'm really compacting the kick drum so that it's one nice chunk of kick, so to speak. And then it's going into the Pultec. You can use any Pultec or any DBX type compressor for this. And then on the Pultec, as you can see, I used a lot of 100 Hertz. The reason for that is that I wanted to really bring out that low end on the kick drum to make it full. And I'm attenuating the high end a little bit, because we don't want to have too much of the highs, the stickiness, I want to say, of the kick happening. So it's clean and defined, just low end boom happening. So that's how I treat the kick drum. Now the snare, same story. Didn't find anything wrong with the snare, but did a similar parallel compression trick with it. So again, it's a DBX 160, but this case, it's going into an API 550A. And what I did is I gave 200 Hertz a little boost, so it's a little bit of the body of the snare to bring it out, then a little bit of 1.5, so that it becomes more in your face. And again, I don't want to have too much of the high end happening, so I dialed it back a little bit, around 10K. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to play you back the rhythm section again in context, and I will bypass the snare parallel, and I will bring it in so you can hear the difference. So let's start this case off without the parallel in. so you can hear how it sounds without it in context with the rhythm section, and then I'll bring it back in. As you could hear, the snare became much more apparent, more body, more in your face, more defined, just how you want to have it in records such as these. The fill didn't do much to it, in actuality completely nothing. Toms, the same story, didn't feel like there was any need for even parallel compression on those. And then there's this little percussion loop. So in this case, I felt the need to be using the Shadow Hills mastering bus compressor, just really to give it coloration. It's a compressor where we can use different types of modes. So we can use nickel, we can use iron, we can use steel. So it's different flavors we can give our signals, as well as using some compression to dial the percussion to a more controlled and defined audio that doesn't peak out in the rest of the mix when we don't want it, when everything defined and controlled. So let me play this back, just the loop with the compressor on, then without it, and then I'll enable it again so you can hear the different color that got put on it and how much more controlled it sounds. So as you can see, it barely is doing anything. Slight hair. And then the coloration just brought out the mid-range a lot more and made it much more, in my opinion, rich sounding as we wanted to have it. Didn't use anything on the percussive group that's in there. Nothing on the cowbell, nothing on the hats. Nothing wrong with those. And that, again, is an approach that I always use, is less is more. So at the end of the day, I always use the 80-20 rule, where it's 80% listening, 20% actually doing work. So the 20% is carving out space, cleaning up signals, adding little bits and pieces here where you feel like it needs to have more body, or it needs to be more present, or it needs some more richness. That's why on the instrumentation there's so little going on as far as processing goes. So it's literally all volume panning to make a statement of clarity in the mix. So this is the rhythm section with the bass. And then, as you can see on the instruments, which I will solo next, there's literally nothing going on except on the xylophone. So this is the chorus, and then just the instrumentation as far as the keyboards go. So on the xylophone, what I felt like that there was a bit too much low end happening. That was cluttering up and getting in the way of the rest of the instrumentations that needed that space. So I cleaned it up. I did that with a low shelf, and then I have a little bit of a dynamic EQ happening around 160 Hertz just to clean it up slightly more. So let me play the xylophone with the equalization on, and then I'll play the xylophone without the equalization on and on again so you can hear the difference. As you could hear and visually see, is when the EQ is not enabled, that there's some low end happening around, I'd say around 80 Hertz, 70, 80 Hertz that just pikes every once in a while. And we don't want to have that because it clutters up and is right in the region where the kick is sitting. So like I told you earlier, we don't want to have that build up, the low end build up, and create a problem. We don't need it in this case, so just roll it off, and then there's some proximity effect happening on the xylophone as far as the fundamental frequencies go that I controlled more with bands 2 and 3, just like dynamic compression, so that we have a more controlled xylophone that doesn't overbear at points with the rest of the instrumentation, since it's a very subtle instrument used in this case. So let me play back the instrumental of the song as it sounds processed now. So one thing I want to point out, there's a chakra tone track in there, and as you can see, the original labeling says LD verse. So it came from a vocal microphone. So Mario decided to put in chakra tones in this song as a way of embracing the way frequencies work within a universe. So he's using specific healing tones for the chakra. And originally I had them muted because I thought it was a feedback. And then after clarification with Mario, he wanted them in because he did those on purpose. So I brought them back in, but instead of putting them right here where the vocals are, I moved them down and put them in the instrumentation track because this is an instrument, so to speak. So that's the instrumentation, and those are the vocals the way I have processed them. Then I'm gonna show you a few things that I did sound-wise on the drums. Because as I spoke to you guys before, back to front panning is reverb. And as much spacious as this track is, I didn't want to have the drum sounding that much hip-hop or pop in your face. So starting off with the kick, I send the kick to bus 2324, which is the trigger. It's actually the snare. So it's the snare that we're using to send for the reverb. So I'm using the percussive reverb that I showed you guys earlier, which is the TSR1 from SoftTube. And it's one of their presets that I altered a slight bit with a shorter reverb time than it originally had. But let me play that back, the instrumentation in this part of the song, so you can hear what it does when I mute the reverb on the snare and then bring it back in, so you can hear the difference of what happens space-wise with that snare. So this is with the reverb on.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep.
So as you can hear with the snare, as soon as I remove the reverb, you can hear how much the snare becomes dry and in your face, and it's not sexy for the song, so to speak. So I sent some reverb to it, and you could hear how it blends from right here in your face to slightly behind the vocals, which is a really nice thing and something that really benefited in the record. Then for the toms, I did the same thing. Let me solo the toms. So those are real like 808 toms, and without the reverb. There's some printed on there, but it's way too dry for the record. So let me play it back and showcase you how it sounds with the additional reverb on there and without it, and again with, so you can hear the differences and see how much more smoother the rhythm section comes by using it.
You're shining like the sun, I'm shining with you. You know I like to face it, eating it up. Your purple water's dripping, I'm drowning, going deep in. So don't you try to save me, baby, cause you need it. You're shining like the sun, I'm shining with you. You know I like to face it, eating it up. Your purple water's dripping, I'm drowning, going deep in. So don't you try to save me.
As you can hear, it's much more blended together with the reverb on there instead of without the reverb on there. So it's a nice trick to keep in mind that reverb is your front to back panner, your front to rear. Did the same thing on the percussion. Let me solo that track again so you can hear it. So as you already can hear by having it soloed with the reverb and then without the reverb, that it becomes much more blended to the back and in a defined space, which suits this record much more than the dry signal. So let me play this back in context, and I'll take the reverb off again in a second, and then I'll bring it back in so you can hear the difference in context with the mix.
Baby, you know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Luxury love, baby. You know I love you, girl. I know how to keep you. That luxury love, whatever you need. For you ain't too much. Take as much as you need to. That luxury love, yeah. Love.
As you can hear, it's much more blended within the context of the mix. Dry didn't sound right, it stuck out, and there's no need for that loop to be sticking out. It has to be part of the record instead of being out there in the front. So that's why I use some of the reverb sent to the percussion so that it's much more blended, much more to the back, and have the vocals really lead the record as it should be. Back to the vocals, as far as cleaning little elements. So there's one vocal track in there that I EQ'd a little bit because I felt that right here where the low mids are, it was a little bit too boomy still after everything. So I'll play you guys that little part.
This is luxury, the luxury love. That's what we was missing, baby. Too much. Take the luxury love, the luxury love, the luxury love. You know I got you. This is luxury, the luxury love. That's what we was missing, baby. Too much. Take the luxury love, the luxury love.
As you can hear with the EQ out, it's just a little, because of the low mids, it's too much lifted in the mix. Because the low end of vocal brings out the vocal more, so it lifts it more out of the mix. So with these little vocal bits, it needed to be blended in with the lead vocal more, instead of being a vocal on its own, so to speak. So that's why I used a little bit of dynamic EQ in the low mids, just to control it a little bit more, to place it slightly behind the lead vocal. There was another vocal point that I had to automate down here, which Mario's vocal wanted to have more of a radio sound. So instead of copying it over to a new track, which is possible, and putting an EQ on there, I kept it on the same track and just used an EQ and automated it to have a more of a radio voice.
Luxury, luxury love. Luxury love was missing. It's just a luxury with me. Luxury love. Luxury, luxury love.
So just a simple little vocal trick that Mario wanted to have in the song. Created more of a different dynamic throughout the whole song without everything having to sound the same vocally. We just added in a radio voice right there to kind of break up the record and go back into the record so it's fresh again for the listener. Thank you guys for watching this year's MixCon, and I hope you guys learned a thing or two from my mix approaches. I want to shout out SonarWorks for their software. I've been using it on many of my mixes when I'm on the go, especially for headphone tuning. So thank you for that. And thank you guys again, and hopefully we see each other next year in person. Bye.
All right, that was a truly awesome MixCon masterclass from Koen Heldens. I learned a lot from that one. I'm going to be recapping some of that in this week's podcast episode where I give you some of my key takeaways. But right now, if you're here for the live premiere, we're going to be doing a live Q&A right now coming up with Koen Heldens. Look for that link on your screen, and that live Q&A will be starting up right away where we can answer your questions in real time. That live Q&A will also be available on replay if you're checking this out, far into the future. Hello, visitors from the future. future, there's a live Q&A. Check it out. Big thanks also to SonarWorks Sound ID reference software for making this presentation possible and free to the public. It is something that Koen Heldens uses on every single mix that he does. He uses so he can trust his headphones. It's an indispensable solution for you guys for not only correcting your headphones, but your speakers, your room, so you can trust what you're hearing and just make decisions without second guessing yourself, and your mixer will improve for it. I think it's one of the best and one of the best bang for the buck solutions out there for this kind of room, speaker, and headphone correction. So big thanks to those guys. Also, remember, you can win in the MixCon giveaway. If you go over to SonicScoop.com/MixCon giveaway, that's SonicScoop.com/MixCon giveaway. We're giving away thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of free stuff from all of the MixCon sponsors. If you want some more great tips on mixing, we've got a whole bunch more MixCon masterclasses. We've also got a free workshop for you called the 5 Habits of Every Great Mixer that you can check out at SonicScoop.com/MixHabits. That's SonicScoop.com/MixHabits, where I distill down for you and tie together the common threads that I found in the approaches of every single one of the great mixers that have come through and done a MixCon presentation over these past, 7 years now? 7 years of MixCon. So we've distilled that all down for you to 5 simple tips that you can integrate into your own mixes. Check that out over at SonicScoop.com/MixHabits. That's SonicScoop.com/MixHabits. Or if you prefer a free intro to mastering, we got you covered there over at SonicScoop.com/Mastering101. Big thanks to Koen Heldens for doing this. Big thanks to Mario for letting us crack open this track. And big thanks to SonarWorks Sound ID Reference for sponsoring this presentation. This has been Justin Coletti of SonicScoop. Hope to see you in that live Q&A. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.